everybody. Welcome to the briefing room. Happy Friday. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us here on ABC News Live. Some breaking news from the White House to close out the week. Another staffing shakeup, or at least a shakeup with the president's nominees. We'll get to that in a second. Also today, we took a trip across town to where 2,000 moms from across the country are gathered on gun violence. We'll tell you about that. And also some special reporting from Hawaii. Major protests on the Mauna Kea volcano there. Why Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is getting involved. We'll talk to him at the end of the show as well. But first, let's bring in our senior justice and investigative reporter, Mike Levine, for more on a big shakeup right now in the president's choice to head the U.S. intelligence agencies. Mike, the president had announced that he was going to name John Ratcliffe, the congressman from Texas, to be the next head of all intelligence gathering in the United States. But moments ago, there's a picture of Congressman Ratcliffe. The president tweeted this. I believe we have the tweets. The president said that he is now has agreed to accept John Ratcliffe's decision to step back, blaming the media, the lamestream media, he called it, explaining that John would be miserable to go through this process, deal with the criticism that's come over the past couple of days. Congressman Ratcliffe is going to stay in Congress. This is significant, Mike Levine, because the DNI is such a critical position in our government. A lot of people don't hear about it all the time, but they do important work.
Yeah, he's basically the coach of the intelligence team. He's not the one running the plays. He's not the one throwing the football, but he is the one that makes it happen, that gets them, ready to go out on the field. 16 agencies, tens of thousands of people around the world that come under his umbrella.
And this was a position created after 9/11 to be the guy that connects the dots, to bridge those silos between the CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon, all the different branches in our intelligence community falls under this one head.
Yeah, one of the biggest intelligence failures from 9/11 was that information wasn't shared. This is the man who makes sure that doesn't happen again.
So a lot of tumult this week on this front. Let's remind everybody where we started. We started on Monday with Dan Coats, the esteemed former senator from Indiana who has been leading the DNI, clashing with President Trump. He abruptly announced that he's out, he's leaving, and the president announced that John Ratcliffe would be stepping in. But immediately, Mike, he started to face a mountain of criticism from all over the place, including from Republicans.
Well, the first response from many people was, who?
Yeah, who is this guy?
Then when people started to look into his record, it turned out that he'd made many statements about his national security credentials, the fact that he had prosecuted terrorism cases when he was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Texas. It turns out he didn't really prosecute those cases. He really was doing a sort of after-action report on a specific terrorism case.
So his claim to fame as a prosecutor was rounding up undocumented immigrants. He said, turns out he wasn't actually involved in that. But this case that you broke reporting on here at ABC News, that, again, just to underscore, he claimed that he was critical in fighting terror cells and their financing, prosecuting people, getting involved in a trial, and even making claims on the radio and on his website, including this one in a recent interview. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, so there were actually two Holy Land trials, and I was brought in for the second one. The first ended in a hung jury, but part of what we looked at here with respect to this new threat, this new radical ideology out there was, how was it being funded?
Turns out, Mike, again, you talked to everybody involved in the case at the time, many people involved in that case. They have no recollection of him being any part of it.
It wasn't just me. It was a whole team at ABC News, and everyone we talked to unanimously said he did not have a big role in this, that he was there, again, as an after-action investigator to look at what had happened and why that first trial didn't go right.
Well, so these embellishments had become a stain on his nomination right out of the gate. In fact, Susan Collins of Maine, the Republican senator, one of the moderates up on Capitol Hill, who would have been critical in confirming John Ratcliffe to this position, voiced skepticism about this just yesterday. Take a listen.
Do you have any comment on Ratcliffe being nominated as DNI?
I really don't. I don't know him at all, so it certainly would be premature for me to be commenting.
Do his public statements concern you at all?
As I said, I really don't know him. I haven't looked at his public statements. I read a transcript of what he said at the Mueller hearing, but obviously is the person who, along with Joe Lieberman, created the position of Director of National Intelligence. I want to make sure we have a person of independence, integrity, and intelligence in that vital spot.
Susan Collins there suggesting what Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, said. I have no idea who this guy is.
Yes, but, and so it's not just about these alleged embellishments. It's about what qualifications does he actually have. The DNI has 4 offices: Office of Counterintelligence, Office of Counterproliferation, Cybersecurity, and Counterterrorism. So only one. Ratcliffe was claiming experience in only one of those offices.
And obviously not enough for some of those Republican critics. Jordan Phelps joins us now from the White House. Jordan, you've been taking a look at not just the number of cabinet positions that the president has acting heads in right now, but a growing list of nominees, people he's picked and put forward who have had to bow out for a whole host of reasons, from personal troubles to embellishments like we saw here.
Devin, this is like a movie that's on replay over here at the White House, and Ratcliffe is just the latest main character in that drama. But yes, Devin, you're exactly right. There is this growing trend. It's been going on for 2.5 years of the president putting forward someone who he intends to nominate, and then that nomination having to be withdrawn usually before it even gets off the ground into the formal process, as was the case here. We saw this, of course, with his pick to run the Pentagon, Patrick Shanahan. We saw this over at the VA with Ronnie Jackson. Those are just to name a couple among a long list of people who the president has put forward. He often touts that he picks the smartest and the best people for these jobs. But for one reason or another, Devin, these nominations tend to sour. A lot of that is that the president tends to govern by impulse, and he'll put forward nominations who haven't been carefully vetted. So that might have been what happened here with Ratcliffe. We know he was very impressed by his performance up on Capitol Hill with Robert Mueller when he questioned and criticized Mueller very directly, and it was a real fiery performance. That might have been something that factored into the president picking him for that post, and just as quickly, Devin, he's out the door.
And as you were talking, Jordan, we were seeing a list of some of those people who have backed out for a number of reasons. Herman Cain came to mind recently, put forward for the Federal Reserve, bowed out after pressure from fellow Republicans. You had Andy Puzder, Heather Nauert to lead the UN. A really interesting list. Jordan Phelps, thanks for that standby there. Mike, any idea who might be tapped to lead our intelligence agencies in this shakeup period here?
Absolutely no idea.
There's nobody on the horizon.
There are lots of people on the horizon, but who does he pick? Does President Trump want to fight now, or does he not?
And he's certainly headed into political season with a tough Senate to get somebody confirmed through Mike Levine. Thanks so much for that. Meanwhile, the president continuing his attacks the past 24 hours on Congressman Elijah Cummings of Maryland. We've seen his vitriol increase over the past few days. The president this morning taking an extraordinary swipe at the congressman for what happened overnight in Baltimore. Elijah Cummings reported that his home had been broken into, and the president said, really bad news. The Baltimore house of Elijah Cummings was robbed. Too bad, seeming to mock the congressman there. That didn't sit well with a lot of the constituents of Baltimore, but also a lot of Republicans. Let's go back to you, Jordan Phelps, because a really surprising voice, a former member of Trump's cabinet, has now spoken out about this very tweet.
Devin, among those notable people coming out to criticize the president for this tweet, saying it just went too far, was his own former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. She said in a tweet, "This is so unnecessary," along with an eye roll emoji. That then prompted a response from one of the president's top advisors, Kellyanne Conway, who responded to Nikki Haley saying, "This is so unnecessary," referring to Haley's tweet. So, Devin, as you can see, the president continues to push the envelope with his attacks on Cummings, his attacks on Baltimore. But, Devin, one thing is for sure, the president continues to hold our attention around these attacks.
Yeah, it simply is quite something. And Jordan Phelps, thanks for that reporting. Not just drawing attacks from former Congress people, former members of the cabinet, but also from a growing number of congressional Republicans. And Ben Siegel is here because, Ben, you cover Capitol Hill, and part of this story of the president's rhetoric, the tone in Washington, his campaign strategy, isn't sitting well with a lot of Republicans, even though they're not speaking out about it. A number of them are deciding to call call it quits in this town, referencing the tone here.
That's right. Well, one of those Republicans, Congressman Will Hurd from Texas, the only black Republican lawmaker in the House, he announced his retirement last night, surprising Washington. He was one of those few Republicans who actually voted with Democrats to condemn the president's tweets about those 4 congresswomen of color. So listen, people retire from Congress for a number of reasons, but the president's rhetoric and some of his positions that Republicans are constantly asked to respond to, that doesn't help their situation at all.
Let's take a look at a list, I believe we have it, of at least 9 Republican members of Congress who've decided to call it quits just in the past couple of months. We see that Will Hurd is on that list from Texas, but you also have 2 women. 2 of the only 13 Republican women in Congress are hanging it up. Also, Paul Mitchell of Michigan. We were just in Michigan this week for the debate. Paul Mitchell, seen as a moderate there, he gave an emotional speech on the House floor just a couple of days ago explaining why he was deciding to retire right now, and he offered some allusions to President Trump. Take a listen.
A career in Washington was never my objective. My mission has always been to simply address significant challenges this nation faces: trade, healthcare, immigration, and infrastructure, to name just a few. However, it appears to me that rhetoric overwhelms policy, and politics consumes much of the oxygen in this city. The time has come to make a difference for my family, to focus my time and energy upon them.
And that was Congressman Paul Mitchell, serving at the end of his term from Macomb County, part of Michigan, that critical area that we were just in the past couple of days. Ben, what's interesting about this list of Republicans retiring is that because there were so many retirements last year, 2018, it helped Democrats win back control of the House. Is this dynamic going to hurt Republicans headed into 2020? Is this something that Republicans should be worried about?
I think it is something they're worried about. Statistically, it is much harder to win re-election than to keep your seat. It's always easier for an incumbent. There's an advantage there. So by virtue of all these Republicans leaving office, that creates better chances for some of these Democrats to pick up these seats. And it also hints at some of the larger demographic problems facing the Republican Party. This is very increasingly becoming a party of white men. There was a joke going around Washington today. Politico was very smart to point it out. There are more men in Congress named Jim than there are Republican women running for re-election right now.
Wow.
So that's one of the larger trends. But certainly, if people retiring does not help them take back the House,
it's going to be really interesting to follow. Ben Siegel, thank you very much for that. Speaking of politics on Capitol Hill, an issue reporting to Republicans, the issue of guns, the Second Amendment, something that has them fired up as we head closer to the 2020 campaign season. Well, a number of moms have come to Washington, D.C. to fight back, to push back, to demand action on gun legislation, to get those Republicans that are aligned with the NRA to step aside and allow a vote on this thing. I want to bring in one of those moms now. She joins us. Brenda Moss is a mom, a survivor, and a mother of who lost someone to gun violence. Brenda, it's great to see you. You're from Lynchburg, Virginia. You're in town for what your organization, Moms Demand Action, is calling the Gun Sense University. Tell us about it.
Gun Sense University is something that we have every year to build our movement so that we become informed on the gun sense laws and all of the legislation that's happening during the year. And Virginia is one of those states that always have something to elect. So.
Tell us about how you became energized and empowered on this issue. What is your connection to gun violence? Tell us about your son. I see your pin.
Yes. My connection to Moms Demand Action is because of my son, Sean. He was shot and killed in 2017, August 26, 2017. He was 34 years old. He was my oldest son. And I had 2 choices. I could either lay there and deprive my other 2 sons of the love that they deserve, or I could get up and fight. So I chose to get up and fight.
And when you're alongside so many other moms in the same position, and I imagine that's very uplifting to be together and pushing for something, what is it that you think can be done right now? I mean, what's the low-hanging fruit in your view?
The low-hanging fruit is background checks, universal background checks, just common sense. You know, if you don't have anything to hide, then a background check is what you do. I mean, I have to have a background check if I go on a job. They test me to drive.
Do you own a gun?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't own a gun. but I'm not against guns.
Virginia has a lot of gun owners.
A lot of gun owners. So, and I think they don't understand it's not about taking your guns. It's not about taking your rights. It's about asking you to be responsible for the choice that you have made.
What did you make? Have you been taking in any of the Democratic debate on this? A lot of talk about gun violence, myriad plans to prevent gun violence, from some which critics are calling sort of pie in the sky, to some very pragmatic, heartfelt proposals. Who do you like in that field?
You know, I'm not really political with that. I go with those that tend to understand that this is a issue. This is a worldwide issue. It's not just anybody's issue. Gun violence doesn't have a color, it doesn't have a weight, it doesn't have a nationality, but it has a target.
And what's your sense? There's been, at least in this town, for so many years, President Obama, former President Obama, always talked about the inaction on legislation related to gun violence as one of his biggest disappointments, biggest frustrations here. What do you think it's going to take to break through on that front? I mean, a lot of talk about the NRA, but what's it going to take?
It's going to take people understanding that life is important. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take people sitting down and having the hard conversations, understanding it's not about the Second Amendment rights. That belongs to everybody. I just choose not to use it. So when you say I want to take your Second Amendment rights, that's not true. And I don't want your guns because my son was shot 17 times.
Oh, gosh.
So I don't want your guns. I want you to be responsible for the choice that you have made.
And what's your son's name, Brenda?
Sean.
Sean, we're thinking of Sean today. Thank you for coming and sharing his story and your story, Brenda Moss. A mom, a survivor, a gun violence, anti-gun violence activist from Lynchburg, Virginia. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brenda. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Moving on now to, speaking of politics, the issues of our day. They certainly were on full display in Detroit this week. The candidates back out on the trail today, a number of them making their way out west after spending the past couple of days in the Midwest. Our Lizette Rodriguez is out in Boulder City. She is tracking a number of the candidates today. Hey, Lizette. So tell us what's in store for this weekend. This is a big weekend with a lot of candidates looking to build on momentum as they push towards the ABC debate in Houston next month.
Yeah, so we are currently in Boulder City, just miles away from Las Vegas, where a bunch of candidates are hitting the ground running here, holding events throughout the region. Tomorrow, 19 of them will be addressing a government workers union that holds about 1 million members. I've been following around Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro in the last 2 days. Beto O'Rourke, who's already qualified for the next debate, said that he's looking forward to continuing his message of fighting for immigration rights and climate change. Julian Castro earlier today told us that while he has not made the next debate for Houston, he is looking forward to qualifying via another poll by heavily campaigning in early states like Nevada, South Carolina, New Hampshire, and Iowa.
So they need those polls, they need those donors. Lizette Rodriguez for us in Boulder City, Nevada. Thanks so much, Lizette. Have a great weekend out there on the trail. Johnny Verhoeven with our political unit is here with us now because all eyes on Houston, Texas, the ABC News debate coming up on September 12th and 13th, if there are 2 nights.
Right.
Remind everybody we're going to be talking a lot about this because the next 3 weeks are, for the candidates are all about meeting the new benchmarks. It's a much tougher standard to get on the debate stage. Not only do they need, Johnny, more donors, but they also need to have a much higher ranking in these polls.
You're right. It's a very significant increase in what they need. The DNC basically doubled the threshold from the first round of debates to the second round.
And is it still an either or is it an and?
You need 130,000 individual donors and then four qualifying polls. You need 2% support in 4 of them that count.
And.
That's a significant thing that candidates need to do. And there are a number of candidates that are definitely in real jeopardy of missing out on the stage.
So far, we can tell all of you that at least 8 of the field of 24 plus candidates have qualified for the Houston debate here on ABC News. Former Vice President Biden, chief among them. That's not a surprise. You might be surprised that Beto O'Rourke has caught that bar after stumbling a little bit in the first debate. Pete Buttigieg, of course, the big money raiser in the second quarter, is there. All the big names. Amy Klobuchar even sort of surprises me getting in under the bar.
She got in today, and for someone like Beto O'Rourke, he definitely benefited from a very quick start. He raised over $6 million in the first 24 hours of his campaign, had a lot of that buzz, so he benefits from sort of getting out of the gate quickly. But you're going to see this winnowing this field based on this debate is going to be a really important thing to watch as we head towards the fall.
And last thing, we should point out to people there are actually two candidates who are on the bubble. They're close. Julian Castro and Andrew Yang are both. They're close. They have met one of these things. They met the donor threshold. They still got to get their poll numbers up.
Right. And then you've got Tulsi Gabbard, who is close to reaching the donor threshold, but is still pretty far behind in polls. Another question mark you have is Tom Steyer, who got in the race pretty late, but has obviously pledged to spend over $100 million of his own money, has a big network from his outside group. So he's already got 2 polls that qualify him, but we're going to keep an eye. Our political team is going to keep an eye on that and track it all the way.
And Marianne Williamson there we see at the end. She came and joined us on ABC News Live after night 1 of the debate in Detroit. She told me she has 40,000 donors she needs to hit. She said she hadn't checked yet what her donor bump had been
and she's
from
someone
the
who's
debate.
definitely benefited from these early
She's
debates.
got a following on social media, so that's good for her, but the polling could be much harder for her.
Polling is definitely going to be tough because that's really about kind of name recognition. That's why you see some of these well-known candidates who have long since qualified for the polls. People know them, but someone like Marianne Williamson definitely needs a little bit more time and a little bit more national exposure if she really wants to make the stage in the fall.
It's the sprint to Houston, the ABC News debate. Johnny, thank you for that. Just to remind everybody, the ABC News third presidential debate takes place in Houston, Texas. We'll be covering it extensively here on ABC News Live. You can catch the entire thing here commercial-free on ABC News Live, complete with pre- and post-coverage. So stay tuned next month, September 12th and 13th. Finally today, we're taking a look at an interesting story out of Hawaii and a major protest that's taking place on that island, a standoff between scientists and politicians and the natives of the island of Hawaii. It's getting some star power support. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has joined protests on a visit to the volcano Mauna Kea on the Big Island of Hawaii, where scientists are hoping to build one of the largest telescopes in the world to look deeper into space. There's a fight over the sacred ground that it will be built on. Our Adrian Bankert, correspondent in the LA Bureau, caught up with The Rock to talk about why he's getting involved. Here's a little bit of that.
I have to ask you about the islands because you've been here for obviously the movie, but you're also here for the Passion Project. You visited the protesters at Mauna Kea?
Correct.
I wanted to ask you because, I mean, obviously, I watched the video that you posted on Instagram and I got chills. This is sacred land. Why was it important for you to make a statement and to show solidarity with these protesters?
It was important for me to get my boots on the ground and go to the protesters and go to the kupuna of the elders and not only show my support, but hear from them directly and listen to them. And this is sacred ground, and it's sacred ground to the native Hawaiians. Mauna Kea is a very sacred place, and it is described as native Hawaiian. It's their church. It's their church, and it's very sacred, and it's something that they believe and they deeply believe and they deeply protect. But it's how we all feel in Polynesian, all throughout Polynesia, is that we have to protect our sacred land.
That was The Rock talking about the sacred land on that volcano in Hawaii with our Adrian Bankert. Big protest there. Governor David Ige of Hawaii walking back in order to get those demonstrators off the land. He says they can stay there for now. It would be the 3rd largest telescope in the world, as we said. Hoping this standoff can cool off a little bit. Scientists and those natives can both get their way and get this resolved. So we'll keep an eye on that. Well, thanks for joining us here on ABC News Live in the briefing room. We're here every day, 3:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 and 6:30 as well. You can download the ABC News app. Follow us in your pocket. Stream us live. Also the latest on all the stories we talked about today. Hope to see you back here Monday, 3:30 as well. I'm Devin Dwyer. Have a great weekend.